go-to person.
I think our next speaker needs no introduction. His name is Bond, Ken Bond. There are things he can do with a dissecting microscope the rest of us can only dream about.
So it's not just within Ireland, it's known everywhere. KGM Bond. You'll see his name in print.
I'm Darragh Fitzpatrick. I'm a lecturer in University College Cork. I've been here 20 years or so. And I know Ken probably the same length of time.
The next day they took me up to the orthopaedic hospital. It's the leaf mine of Phalaenoptera trifasciella, which feeds on our native honeysuckle.
We've about 1,200 species of moth. Only 2 of them eat your clothes, okay, which is something people are fascinated to find out. So anyone who's seen a moth trap for the first time is enthralled, basically. It's like nature's jewellery box, all the different species that are there, and the beauty of the species as well is something that everyone should know about.
Very beautiful markings, isn't it?
It's a moth, so everybody's excited.
Well, it could be a cream wave now. Common wave, cream wave.
Yeah, there was 11 in the trap, but they were knocking themselves daft, so I let my brothers go. Just kept something. Lunar hornet moth, yeah.
Luna as in Lunar.
Yeah. I've known Ken since the late 1980s. I started mothing in 1988 in Northern Ireland, and Ken was one of those people who you heard about. You only appreciate over time what Ken's actually done in terms of the moths of Ireland, and I mean the amount of data that Ken has gathered himself personally from across the entire country is just quite incredible.
This is an actinic light trap for catching moths and other insects indeed. The moths fly around the light tube and eventually end up inside the trap where they sit on egg cartons.
Ken has been mothing, I guess, since the 60s, so that's several decades of mothing. And his knowledge built up over that time is, it's like a treasure trove.
I just have a careful look around it first, and then I'll start dismantling the trap. So, we're ready to start.
Great. Go. Yeah. But just,
That's the elephant talk moth.
I wore it in honour.
Which might be, it's possibly a bit too late in the season for them. But yeah, there's another.
Oh, grasshopper.
Is there?
Yeah. Or
Well, they
cricket.
don't often come in. Yeah.
Wee.
Oh, that's right. Wow. Sorry, some things are active here. That's the magpie moth now, proper view of it, you see. In a busy spell in the summer, I'd write a whole A4 page of notes for a day. All of that is put into the permanent ledger. When I'm using a moth trap, for example, I write down the various names of each species in scientific form as I record it, and I put a tick for each one and keep adding further ticks for further specimens. And I have the usual system of coming to 5 and then striking the group off. Eventually I have a long list of species, and I later copy this out into my permanent notebook. And then we have the date, the method, and also we enter things like whether the species is resident or migrant. With the grid reference attached, this is fed into the system in Moths Ireland on the National Biodiversity Data Centre, and they have programs which will automatically map the distribution of each species. I became very interested in insect distribution and its relation to climate, geology and so on. Eventually I started collecting a few butterflies and moths, and I still have the old collection, bits of it at home, but it's in poor condition. But I know roughly the dates and I know the place. So the records have been, from 1955, have been fed into the Biological Records Centre, possibly the earliest live records they have.
Ken already had probably the latter half of his records digitised, but the early records were in notebooks, countless notebooks. So when Ken's data set eventually came in, I think it grew the national database up to about 250,000 records, but Ken made up probably nearly 30% of it.
For the first time, we're going to have a group of people coming together with one interest in mind, just the moths, just those 1,000 or so species. Ken will put us right. How many species are there out, Ken? 1,470 and a half. And we've got this one objective, and that is to try and get to know each other, to help each other out, and maybe for the first time ever, to form a loose or even a more formal moth society.
My volume 1 notebook started in about 1969. I'm now on volume 7, and notebooks got bigger and bigger. I thought right from the start I was insistent on two things. I would use the scientific names of the moths, and I would record the grid references as accurately as possible. One of the interesting people who collected moths, widely known in that area, was Thomas Greer, who lived in County Tyrone. 10,000, he reckons 10,000 specimens in the collection, and they're nearly all lost, but that's the problem. Lack of curation and lack of care of collections.
Thanks very much, Ken. That was a fantastic review of Irish lepidoptera, I suppose, since the 1800s.
We've got historical data from lots of other people that Ken outlined in his talk today, but of course he didn't mention himself. Keeping that continuity going to the point now where so many other moth recorders here are actually, contributing to the database, of which he's got something like 80,000 records of his own in.
I'm Aidan O'Hanlon. I'm the entomology curator here at the National Museum of Ireland in the Natural History Division. Nowadays, what our collection gets used for is really biodiversity research. Ken has been coming in to visit the collections quite regularly since the early 1980s. To have his expertise in coming in and arranging the collections has been a massive help. He's the country's expert on moths.
I'm basically transferring specimens from an old unsorted collection or series of collections into a single, properly sorted, staged and mounted collection. These are the moths that are in a collection which I have to rearrange and place in the new drawers. I'm going to first of all remove the lid so we can get a closer look at these. Sanguinalis, it's quite common in the Burren and it's very rare in Britain and occurs in a few other places in Ireland. Beautiful species. We have one of the new drawers here with the specimens laid out species by species. That is one species, one specimen. The name of it is underneath. And we have quite a lot of specimens here. I've just seen it says Indian meal moth. That's a misspelling. It's the Indian meal moth. Anyway, that has to be corrected. And then we come to a change in the family name, moving to Crambidae. Pyrrhella, and we've left a space in case more specimens come in. Some of the abdomens broke off, so we've put them in these little plastic vials. Some of the names are just fallen off. Those are very ancient labels. We will cut a piece of plasters out to the right size, put the pin through that, so we don't touch the small pin at all. It's far too delicate. The right thickness, not too springy. So that's what I use basically all the time for every specimen. So those are the micro pins, the critical thing for setting a moth properly.
I'd say the work that Ken does is extremely important as a validator, so he's an expert on the Irish moths and butterflies. So a lot of the trickier moths, tiny little moths, people would send to Ken in particular, and he'd have to do painstaking work, technical work, dissecting out bits of it to look at them under the microscope and describe them.
So to confirm the identity, we sometimes have to dissect them. This one here, I have removed the abdomen and made a genitalia slide of it, and I'll just lift it out. The original label is here, which is a registration number, which will tell us when it came into the museum and from where. Underneath this, we have my identification of the name and the date, the year when I identified it, and also reference number for the slide. If insects are very similar in every way we can see, but actually different species, probably the only way of showing that they're morphologically distinct is by looking at the genitalia. And in a way it's not surprising, because if the genitalia are different, it means they cannot interbreed. This species was not confirmed from Ireland until 2022. I dissected it to confirm the identity. So you can see that the data label is the top label. I grew up in Dublin in the 40s and 50s. My father bought the first two books in the series, The New Naturalist, just after the war. I still have his notes in the book saying where to look for various butterflies according to the maps. This tree is famous in a way because for about 20 years I've come here in the spring and occasionally other times of the year to look for the holly blue. And in April and May I regularly see one or two holly blues flying around the upper part of it. It's the most consistent site I know for holly blue. I eventually left school and I joined the Meteorological Service, the British Meteorological Service at that time. Initially in Belfast International Airport, as it is now. And I was only there briefly, and then I went to Bracknell, the headquarters in south of England. Anyway, I eventually decided I needed a change of location, so I went to the Isle of Man, where I was working in the meteorological office at the airport from 66 to 75. And I would work nights, one night in 5 there. And on night duty, on warm nights, all the lights would be switched off. And the control tower had these fluorescent lights. And on warm nights, you'll get vast numbers of moths coming from the airfield on the coast through the windows. And I started recording them. And I had the good luck of meeting one of my neighbours there, Larch Garrett, who was the curator of natural history at the Manx Museum. And she put me in touch with the Biological Records Recording Centre in Huntington, Monkswood, Huntington. And I got their recording cards and started sending them records for each 10 kilometres square. I remember the way, yes, the little father. I left the Isle of Man in 1966 to do a teacher training course in Germany, which I gave up eventually. But I found that when I moved there, I was seeing new insects and new habitats, and I continued recording, even though it wasn't originally what I was meant to be doing. And eventually I thought, this is what I should be doing. So I applied to come back as mature student to Dublin in 1980, and I did a degree in Trinity College Dublin in natural history, specialising in zoology in 1984. And then I came to Cork. And all the time I was recording more and more intensively moths and butterflies. And I became particularly interested in the smaller moths, the microlepidoptera, which were little known and little studied at that stage. Still a lot to learn about them. I do nearly all of my dissecting and identifying here in my house. Formerly I used to do the labs in UCC or TCD or other places, but gradually I've moved everything at home, and I have all the books around me, the specimens, the chemicals needed for dissection. It's very important to have a reference collection of slides. If you have two very similar species, the illustration alone may not be sufficient to tell the difference. This is the dissecting microscope for handling the specimen, taking the abdomen off, and for going through the series of alcohols that are used. That's transmitted light, which you'll see will shine through the preparation, and this is incident light, which shines onto it from above. And then we'll talk about the compound microscope. I put the slide underneath this. The image here is inverted. You have to put the slide the wrong way around, so to speak, underneath it. We can focus crudely or very finely with this control. Okay, I have it now. One of the projects I'm mainly involved with is a scheme to identify moths caught in the southern Balkans. In front of me I have an example on screen of a species which I've managed to identify. It's called Etobalia anonymella, and it's from North Macedonia. It's sometimes very difficult to identify these because they're little known and there are no obvious keys such as books or guides, and some of the species have only recently been discovered. That's the left side of the moth, head on the right and the pin through it, and left wing, that would probably be about 5 millimeters long in reality. I drop the abdomen into a test tube. I normally do 5 dissections at the same time. I put a number on each test tube. I fill this beaker to about halfway up, put the test tube in it and put it on a hot plate. I boil it for between 5 and 15 minutes. So instead of a cloudy mixture of opaque material, you have a clear image right through the abdomen. So when I take the specimen out of the water beaker, I pour the contents into this cavity block. The sample is placed from the KOH into acetic acid. This is a bottle of 10% alcohol. So eventually you'll end up with this one in 10%, 50%, 70%, 90% and absolute alcohol. So these are footman moths which feed on lichens. We have quite a few of those species here. Some of them are increasing now because of improved air quality. There are more lichens on trees. The buff footman is spreading enormously all over the country. But some things are increasing at an amazing rate and other things are just disappearing. It's happening so quickly now.
How many cabinets are there of those?
But there are 30 on that side, so there'll actually be 60 in that. They're very mixed, you know. I have a special interest in the Balkans because I visited Albania twice, 2009 and 2014. I have a friend who was living there at the time and lives there part of the time. I was able to visit the country quite freely and easily, and I was astonished by the variety of insects there. I think it's urgent to get to know more about the fauna of these parts of the world, specifically the Balkans, the mountainous areas of Albania, Montenegro, and North Macedonia, as we now have to call it, not Macedonia. And There's so much wildlife there, so many explored, unexplored places. But a lot of these areas are now being exploited. Timber's been cut, sometimes illegally. Land has been cleared. So species are being lost at the same time, and we're trying to catch up with this loss of species. That's my motivation. That's the mother of pearl moth.
That is beautiful. Oh,
It's the moth with the longest English name. Lesser, broad, bordered, yellow underwing. As you've got large yellow underwing, broad bordered, lesser, least, beautiful, and there's at least one other. That's the lesser broad bordered yellow underwing again. So this is the common here, the large. Now to demonstrate the yellow underwing, I just need to touch this. When they fly off, you see the flash of yellow. Would you be doing it? Yeah, see it there?
Wow.
Try again.
So Ken, this is the moth I was telling you before. It's a sphingid. It's a hawk moth from Java, that we named after you. So it's the one on the bottom there. So that's you. That's your species.
So it's obviously very close to some of the other species.
Yeah, it came about. There's a guy called Ulf Eichberger. That's now described as a new species, but in the process, it freed up a couple of other species names, and he asked me for some potential names, people I could name it after, and who better than you, the Irish moth expert?
Well, thank you very much.
His legacy is in the data that he leaves behind and all the information that he's gathered, which will not be lost. It's still his information that is put into the database, but also his collection. So it goes on forever, really, beyond him. The same way as he talked about other people's collections today, and he's upset at some of the collections that have been lost by being sold and broken up. That won't happen with his. It's his legacy is there forever.
But anybody that's opened up a moth trap to see what's inside, what's flying around us all the time, at night time, and sometimes during the day as well, would understand how easy it is to just get drawn in, not just to the species and the different colours and the fabulous patterns, but also how they contribute to biodiversity, to pollination, to the natural world around us. It's enormous. And then if you weren't hooked when you opened up the moth trap, once you start talking to Ken and you hear the passion, then you're definitely hooked. You're definitely hooked.
Frantic slave of the winds, almost breaking into splinters, flashing in a seasonal insanity.